The grand hall was filled with whispers as the human walked in. He was dressed in simple armor, nothing too fancy, just practical and worn from years of use. The floor beneath his boots echoed with each step, the sound louder than usual because everyone in the room had gone silent. The audience was filled with alien royalty and warriors from all over the galaxy, each one more imposing than the last. Some were large, with thick, muscled bodies that looked like they were made for war. Others had scales or strange armor that glinted in the light, but none of them dared to speak as the human entered. He had been summoned to the court of the arrogant queen, the ruler of this planet, to answer questions that could change his life. No one knew much about him except that he was human, and that alone made him stand out. Humans weren't exactly rare in the galaxy, but they were certainly not known for being fighters. The rumors said he was a mechanic, nothing more, someone who fixed ships for a living. Yet, there was something about him that made everyone nervous. As the human reached the center of the room, the queen's voice rang out. Her tone was sharp, full of authority, and it cut through the silence like a blade. "How many battles have you fought?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. The room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone in the hall turned their attention to the human. Some were curious, others were doubtful, but all of them were expecting the same thing: a mistake. They were sure he would say something like none or a few, something that would mark him as a joke in this room of mighty warriors.
The human paused for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked up at the queen.
His face showed no fear, no hesitation, only calm certainty. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of truth. 60, he said simply. The queen's eyebrows raised, and for a moment there was silence again. The warriors in the room exchanged quick glances, and some even laughed quietly under their breath. 60 battles? They had never heard of such a thing. Most of them hadn't fought that many in their entire lives. To the queen, it seemed absurd. No human could have fought in 60 battles. No human could have survived that long. The queen leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his.
"You expect me to believe that?" Her voice was cold now, mocking. "You, a human, fought in 60 battles. Tell me, what kind of battles are you speaking of?"
The human's gaze didn't falter. He met her eyes, and for the first time, the room seemed to quiet even more. He wasn't intimidated. His voice was low, but every word carried the weight of his experience. "Battles of survival," he said. "Fighting not for glory, but for life. Each one a test of strength, wit, and will. I didn't fight for a title or to be remembered. I fought because I had to. And in every battle, I learned something new." The queen's expression remained unreadable, but the silence that followed spoke volumes. The warriors who had once laughed now stood still, their eyes wide. There was something in the human's voice that made them reconsider their earlier thoughts.
60 battles.
Not for glory, not for honor, but for survival. It was then that the queen realized she had underestimated him. She had expected to dismiss him, to look down on him as nothing more than an oddity. But there was a depth to this man, a quiet confidence that she couldn't ignore. For a moment, the queen didn't know whether she was intrigued or annoyed by his calm demeanor. How could someone so ordinary, so unremarkable in appearance, carry such a weight of experience?
She cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the situation.
"And where were these battles fought, human?" she asked, her voice now more curious than mocking. The human didn't respond immediately. He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the warriors and nobles who were still staring at him in disbelief. He could see the challenge in their gazes, the doubt. They didn't believe him. And why should they? He was just a human, after all. "They were fought across the galaxy," he said quietly. On worlds you've never heard of. Worlds where the laws of survival are written in blood, and the only thing that matters is whether you can fight long enough to see another sunrise. The queen's eyes flickered for a moment. She leaned back in her throne, clearly taken aback by his words. The room was still, the tension thick. Some of the nobles shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to speak. The queen looked at him for a long time, as if weighing his words. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer now, though no less authoritative. 60 battles! If you truly have fought that many, then perhaps you are worth my time. But I will be the judge of that, human. I have one more question for you. The human stood tall, his face unreadable. Go ahead. The queen smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew she held the power. Prove it, she said, her eyes glinting.
Show me that you are more than just stories and empty words.
Fight in the arena and show me that you are worthy of standing in my presence.
The human didn't flinch.
Ooh. He nodded slowly. I'll fight.
But remember this, Your Majesty. It's not always the strongest who win battles. It's the ones who know how to survive them. And with that, the tension in the room shifted. The warriors looked at each other, and the queen's eyes remained locked on the human. What had started as a simple question had now turned into a challenge, one that would test not only the human's strength, but his very resolve. The human had said 60 battles. The queen wanted to see if he could survive one more. The arena was massive. High walls surrounded it, and the floor was covered with a mix of sand and stone, worn smooth from centuries of battles fought within these very walls. Above, in the royal viewing box, the queen watched, her eyes sharp and calculating. The air was thick with tension. The crowd, filled with warriors and nobles, murmured among themselves, eager to see if the human could back up his claim of 60 battles. The human stood at the center of the arena, his stance relaxed but ready. His eyes scanned the area, taking in everything: the towering walls, the distant gates, and the royal box where the queen sat, her gaze unwavering. His hand rested casually on the hilt of his weapon, a simple blade, nothing like the extravagant swords or energy weapons the other warriors wielded. But it was a weapon he knew well. But a weapon that had served him through countless battles. Across from him, a figure stepped into the arena. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a helmet that concealed most of his face. His armor was dark and sleek, designed for both speed and strength. This was one of the queen's best generals, known for his ruthless efficiency in battle. His reputation was legendary, and he had never lost a fight. His eyes, cold and focused, locked onto the human as he raised his weapon, a massive energy sword, humming with power. The crowd grew silent, and the queen's voice rang out over the arena. "Let the duel begin," she declared. With a sudden fluid motion, the general charged forward, his energy sword glowing as it cut through the air. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped aside, his movements smooth and controlled, as if he had all the time in the galaxy to spare. The general swung his sword in a wide arc, aiming to strike the human down in one swift blow. But the human was already gone, moving faster than the eye could follow. In the blink of an eye, the human was behind the general, his blade drawn. He didn't strike. He simply tapped the general's shoulder lightly with the flat of his sword. It was a mockery, a challenge. The general whirled around in surprise, his face twisted with anger beneath his helmet. But before he could react, the human was already moving again, circling him with calm, deliberate steps. The general roared in frustration, raising his energy sword to strike again. But this time, the human didn't move. Instead, he stood still, waiting. The general lunged forward, his weapon crackling with energy. At the last moment, the human sidestepped again, using the general's momentum against him. The general stumbled off balance, and before he could recover, the human's sword came down across his armor. The blow was quick, precise, and calculated. The general staggered back, clutching at his side where the blade had struck, but there was no blood, just the unmistakable hum of a shield absorbing the impact. Still, the general's expression shifted. The human had gotten too close, and his strike had been too accurate for a mere mechanic, too fast for someone who hadn't trained in the ways of warfare. The general growled in frustration, his pride wounded. "You're nothing but a lucky fool," he spat, his voice muffled by his helmet. The human didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes never left the general as he watched him, patiently waiting for the next move. The crowd was silent now, watching the two combatants in awe. They had expected the human to falter, to fail, but he wasn't. He was holding his ground. With a roar, the general attacked again, this time with a flurry of strikes. The energy sword crackled and hummed, each swing more powerful than the last. But the human moved with an almost unnatural grace, dodging and weaving between each blow, his body a blur. He wasn't just fighting with strength, he was fighting with experience, using his opponent's power against him. The general's strikes grew more desperate. His energy sword clashed against the human's blade with a series of deafening noises. The arena seemed to shake with the force of the blows, but the human remained calm, his eyes never leaving his opponent. The general's frustration grew. He was beginning to realize that this fight was not going to be as easy as he had thought. The human, in contrast, seemed as though he was barely breaking a sweat. His movements were effortless, and he didn't even seem tired. This wasn't the first battle he had fought. He had faced worse, much worse, and unlike the general, he wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just trying to survive. The general let out a roar of rage and swung his sword down with all his might. The human ducked under the blow and, in a swift motion, disarmed the general, sending his weapon flying across the arena. The general staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. He was unarmed now, vulnerable. For a moment, everything went silent. The general stood frozen, his hands raised in surrender, but the human didn't move. He simply watched the general, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't need to kill him. This wasn't about death. It was about proving a point. The human's experience, his survival, had gotten him this far. And just like that, the fight was over. The general, humiliated, knelt on the ground, defeated not by strength, but by strategy. The human hadn't used brute force. He had used his mind, his understanding of the battle, his knowledge of how to survive. The crowd sat in stunned silence, and the queen's eyes narrowed as she watched. She had expected a show of power, a display of raw strength, but what she had seen was something different, something far more dangerous. The human stood tall, his blade still in hand, his expression unreadable. He didn't gloat, he didn't show off, he simply looked at the queen, waiting for her next move. "Enough!" the queen's voice rang out, breaking the silence. "You've proven your point." The human didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, leaving the general on the ground, still kneeling in defeat. The crowd, still in shock, slowly began to murmur among themselves. They had seen a display of skill and strategy unlike anything they had expected. And the queen? She was left staring at the human, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. He had survived, and in the process, he had just shown her that there was more to power than raw strength. He had something far more dangerous: experience, cunning, and the ability to survive against all odds. The human walked through the halls of the palace, his steps steady and sure. The duel had been brief, and now, as he made his way back to the royal chambers, the whispers around him had grown louder. The queen's warriors, who had once looked at him with disdain, now stared at him with a new kind of respect, though some still couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. He had defeated their best general with ease, something that no one had expected. The human didn't feel victorious, though. For him, it was just another battle survived, just another day. He reached the queen's private chambers where she awaited him. The door opened without a sound, and he stepped inside, his eyes immediately meeting hers. She was seated at her throne, her posture regal as always, but there was something different in her gaze. It wasn't the arrogance that had been there before. Instead, it was curiosity, mixed with something else he couldn't quite place. "You've proven yourself," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge.
I never expected to see such skill from a human. The human didn't respond right away. He simply stood before her, his expression unreadable.
He had seen this look in others before, admiration mixed with disbelief. The queen had expected to humiliate him, to put him in his place. Instead, she had found herself impressed. But the human knew better than to let such things go to his head. The queen's respect wasn't something to be taken lightly, especially when you weren't sure where her true loyalties lay.
"You have experience," she continued, her eyes never leaving his.
But experience alone doesn't win wars. It's not just about surviving. It's about knowing when to fight and when to wait. The human nodded slowly. He understood what she was saying. His battles had never been about glory or honor. They had always been about survival. He had learned to fight when he had no other choice, to wait when he knew the time wasn't right. But the queen didn't know his full story, and he wasn't about to tell her. Some battles were meant to be kept private.
You think I don't know that? He asked, his voice low and steady. You think I'm here to prove myself to you?
"I'm not." The queen raised an eyebrow, surprised by his bluntness. She had expected him to be more humble, to thank her for the opportunity, to play the part of the defeated underdog who had somehow managed to overcome the odds. But the human wasn't interested in playing games. He wasn't here for her approval. "No," he said quietly. "I'm here because I was asked to be. I'm here because I have my own reasons. And whether you understand them or not doesn't matter to me." For a moment there was silence between them. The queen studied him, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to figure him out. She had never met anyone quite like him before. He was strong, yes, but that wasn't what intrigued her. It was his attitude, his lack of fear, his complete disinterest in gaining her favor. "You're different from the others," she said finally.
"Most would be honored to stand in my presence. But you?
You act as if it's just another day." The human didn't smile, didn't show any sign of amusement. Instead, he just stared at her, his gaze unwavering. "I've seen a lot of things in my time. Honor doesn't mean much when you're just trying to survive. All I care about is staying alive and getting to the next day." The queen leaned back in her throne, folding her arms across her chest. "And what if the next day brings you nothing but more battles? What then?" The human took a deep breath, then looked away, his eyes traveling to the window where the stars outside glimmered like distant lights. "Then I'll fight, just like I always have. But I won't fight for you.
Or anyone else. I'll fight for myself."
The queen's expression softened ever so slightly. It was clear that she hadn't expected such a response. Most would have fought for fame or for a cause. But this man, this human, fought only for himself. It was a mentality that was hard to understand, yet she couldn't deny that there was something strangely admirable about it. "I asked you to prove yourself," she said after a long pause, her voice thoughtful. "But now I wonder, what do you want in return?" The question caught the human off guard. What did he want? He had never thought about it that way. Most of the time, he just fought to survive, to get by. But now, with the queen's question hanging in the air, he realized that there was something more, something he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "I don't want anything from you," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But there is something you can give me." The queen's eyes narrowed again, clearly intrigued.
"And what is that?"
The human looked back at her, his gaze steady and unflinching. Away off this planet. I've been stranded here too long. I need to leave. The Queen was silent for a moment, considering his request.
You think I owe you that? I don't think you owe me anything, the human replied.
But I know you're not the type of person to let a skilled fighter go to waste. You've seen what I can do. You've seen how I fight. I could be useful to you.
The Queen studied him carefully. He wasn't like the others who had come before him.
Most of her subjects were desperate for her favor, eager to do whatever it took to earn her approval. But this human, he was different. He wasn't begging for anything. He wasn't asking for her help. He simply wanted a way out. And in that, the Queen saw something unexpected, a kind of strength she hadn't seen before.
You're asking for freedom, she said quietly. And yet you come here, into my court, into my palace, and fight for nothing but your own survival. The human didn't answer.
He didn't need to. He had already said what he needed to say. You'll get your way off this planet, the Queen finally said, but you'll have to prove your loyalty to me. I don't work with those who have no value, the human's eyes flashed. But he didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had done enough to prove himself. Now he would wait for the Queen to make good on her word. As he turned to leave, the Queen spoke again, her voice tinged with something almost like respect. You'll have your freedom, but know this. You are not the only one who has fought battles in this galaxy. And if you think that surviving one fight makes you strong, then you are mistaken. Survival is only the beginning. The real fight begins now. The human didn't look back as he left her chambers. He knew what she meant. He had fought many battles in his life, but this was the first one where survival wasn't the only goal. Now, he had to decide whether he was willing to fight for something more. The days that followed were filled with tension. The human found himself in a strange position. He had never been one to play politics or try to win favor, but now he was caught in the web of a royal palace, where every action seemed to matter and every word could be a trap. The Queen had promised him a way off the planet, but the path to that freedom was far from clear. Each day the human was summoned to the Queen's chambers, where they discussed the threats facing her empire. It seemed there was always someone plotting against her. Sometimes it was an alien faction, a rival monarch, or a group of rebels seeking to overthrow her rule. The human listened, his mind sharp and alert, picking up on details others might miss. He had learned long ago to read people, to listen not just to their words, but to the silence between them. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the palace walls, the human was summoned again. He entered the Queen's chambers, and this time she was not alone. A group of her closest advisors stood around her, their faces grim. "We have a problem," the Queen said without preamble, her voice cold and controlled. "A fleet of enemy ships is approaching. If we don't act quickly, we will be vulnerable." The human's eyes narrowed. He could tell by the way the Queen spoke that she was hiding something. There was a quiet confidence in her tone, but beneath it, he could sense fear. It wasn't fear of death, he could tell that much, but fear of losing control. She didn't want to seem weak in front of her advisors, but she was already calculating the risks, trying to figure out how to defend her empire with limited resources. "What do you need from me?" the human asked, his voice steady. He had no doubt that this situation could turn dangerous, but he had been in worse predicaments. The Queen glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I need you to lead a small team to infiltrate their fleet." "You're the only one who has proven capable of handling such a task." The human nodded slowly. He had no love for the Queen or her empire, but he wasn't going to turn down the chance for freedom. If this was what he needed to do to earn his way out, he would do it. "I'll do it," he said, his voice low and determined. "But I need to know everything you can tell me about the enemy."
The Queen gave him a sharp nod, and one of her advisors stepped forward, holding a data pad.
He handed it to the human, who scanned the information quickly. The enemy fleet was large, and they were well armed. The mission was going to be dangerous, but that was nothing new to the human. He had faced worse. "Get ready," the Queen said, her eyes lingering on him for a moment. "This is your chance. Don't fail me." The human didn't reply. He didn't need to. He had learned long ago that in battles like these, it was best to keep his words to a minimum. Action spoke louder than anything else. He turned and walked out of the room, heading toward the armory to prepare for the mission. Hours later, the human and his small team of soldiers were standing at the edge of the enemy fleet. Their mission was simple: infiltrate the enemy's command ship, gather intelligence, and disable their weapon systems. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it was necessary. The human didn't mind the quiet, the cold darkness of space. He had always preferred it that way. There was no noise, no distractions, just the task at hand. The team moved quickly, silently boarding the enemy ship under the cover of darkness. The human led the way, his instincts guiding him through the ship's corridors. He had been in many ships like this before, dark, cold, filled with soldiers who didn't care who they killed as long as they got paid. But this time was different. This time, he was doing it for himself. The deeper they went into the enemy ship, the more tense the atmosphere became. They moved through the hallways, careful not to alert the guards. The human's eyes started from one corner to the next, always alert, always searching for potential threats. It wasn't just the soldiers they had to worry about. The enemy had spies, people who would be looking for them, and if they were discovered, the mission would fail. They reached the control room, and the human nodded to his team. It was time to act. They stormed the room, taking out the few guards who were there, moving quickly and efficiently. The human was the first to reach the central console, his fingers flying over the controls. He was fast, precise, and calm under pressure. He didn't have time to waste. "Almost there," he muttered under his breath as the console beeped, signaling that they were gaining control of the ship's systems. But just as he was about to finish, the console flashed red, a warning. The human's heart raced. It was a trap. They had been detected. "Move," he shouted to his team. "Get to the escape pods now!" The soldiers didn't hesitate. They knew what was at stake. They ran, weapons drawn, as the alarms blared through the ship. The human moved with them, but his mind was already working ahead. He knew they wouldn't make it to the escape pods in time. The enemy would be closing in on them. "Split up," he ordered. "Take different routes."
"We need to confuse them."
The team broke off, disappearing into the ship's corridors. The human continued to work, using his knowledge of the ship's layout to stay one step ahead of the enemy. The ship's alarms were deafening now, and soldiers were running past him, but the human kept moving, always staying in the shadows. He had done this before. He knew how to survive. He reached the escape pod bay and found one pod still available. He jumped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. As he secured the hatch, he glanced back at the ship's control room on the monitor. The mission wasn't a complete failure. They had gathered valuable intelligence, and the enemy fleet was in disarray. It was enough. The escape pod rocketed away from the enemy ship, and the human watched as it grew smaller in the distance. He didn't feel relief. Not yet. There was still too much to do. As the pod drifted through space, he allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. He had done it. He had survived. And now, there was nothing left to do but wait for the Queen to keep her word. The mission was over, but the real battle was just beginning. The human didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a force to be reckoned with.